happened 7 days ago, if you believe that the United States military launched a raid on Venezuela just to capture one man, you're missing the single most important financial signal of your lifetime. Guys, open your eyes. What happened on January 3rd at 2 o'clock in the morning was not a political operation. It was not a diplomatic mission. It was a bank robbery. It was the definitive, undeniable confirmation that the United States dollar has officially reached the end of the line. We need to call this exactly what it is. This is the dollar death blow. When you strip away the flags and the speeches, the raid on Caracas was the desperate act of a bankrupt empire that can no longer afford to pay for the resources it needs to survive. Think about it. For the last 50 years, the United States has enjoyed a privilege that no other country in history has ever had. They could print pieces of green paper that cost nothing to produce, and trade them for real things. They could print dollars and get Saudi oil. They could print dollars and get Chinese electronics. They could print dollars and get Mexican silver. It was the greatest magic trick in economic history, but the magic has run out. The world has stopped believing in the paper. The debt has grown so large, $38.5 trillion and counting, that the math is physically impossible. The interest payments alone are consuming the entire tax revenue of the country. And when an empire realizes that its credit card is maxed out, when they realize that nobody wants their IOUs anymore, they don't stop consuming, they stop trading, and they start taking. We have officially entered stage 4 of the empire collapse cycle. This is the stage known as desperate resource acquisition. It is the moment when the hegemon realizes that the only asset they have left is their military, and they decide to use it to seize the collateral. Do you really think they sent helicopters and special forces just to arrest Nicolas Maduro? Do you think they risked a global war just for a photo op? No. They went in for the prize. They went in for the $17.3 trillion worth of proven oil reserves sitting under the Venezuelan soil. They went in because the strategic petroleum reserve in the United States is empty. They went in because they need real, tangible wealth to backstop a financial system that is hollowed out by inflation and derivatives. The dollar is dying, so they are trying to back it with stolen oil. This is the signal you have been waiting for. It proves that the government knows exactly how bad the situation is. They know the printing press isn't enough anymore. If the dollar was strong, they would just buy the oil. They would just write a check. But they didn't write a check. They sent a gunship that tells you everything you need to know about the purchasing power of the fiat currency in your pocket. It is worthless. And if they are willing to invade a sovereign nation to secure their energy supply, what do you think they will do when they realize they are running out of the other strategic asset they need to wage war? What do you think they will do when they realize they are out of silver? Because you can't run a Tomahawk missile without silver. You can't run a satellite without silver. You can't run the AI systems that guide those helicopters without silver. And unlike oil, they can't just pump more silver out of the ground in Venezuela. They have to find it. They have to buy it, or they have to confiscate it. So do not look at this raid as foreign policy, and look at it as the final warning bell. The rules of the game have changed. We are no longer in a global free market where prices are determined by supply and demand. We are in a global resource war where assets are determined by who has the biggest stick. And in this environment, holding paper assets, holding stocks, bonds, or currency is suicide. Because paper is just a claim on a government that is currently resorting to piracy to pay its bills. You need to hold what they are chasing. You need to hold the real assets. And to understand where we go next, to understand why this specific military action guarantees $200 silver, you have to look at the history books. You have to realize that we have seen this movie before. Rome did it. The British did it. The Dutch did it. They all followed the exact same 7-stage pattern of decline. And if you map the United States onto that timeline, the conclusion is terrifying. We aren't just in debt, we are in the terminal phase. Let's break down the 7 stages of empire. Let's look at exactly where we are on the clock and why stage 4 is the point of no return. History never lies, it only rhymes. And right now the rhyme scheme is screaming at us from the pages of every history book ever written about the fall of great powers. You have to understand that nations do not just collapse overnight. They follow a specific mathematical trajectory that is as predictable as the tides. Whether you are talking about the Roman Empire, the Dutch Empire, or the British Empire, the pattern is always identical because human nature never changes and the corruption of money never changes. We have passed through the early stages of this cycle, the stages of sound money, then public works, then affluence, and we are now deep into the danger zone that historians call the decadence phase. But economically, we are in something much more specific and much more violent. We have officially entered stage 4. To understand stage 4, you have to look at the balance sheet of the United States, which is no longer a financial document, but a crime scene. The national debt has now crossed $38.5 trillion. I want you to try and visualize that number because the human brain is not designed to comprehend it. If you stacked 30 $8.5 trillion $1 bills on top of each other, the pile would reach past the moon. It is a number that has lost all connection to reality. But here is the statistic that matters more than the total. It is the speed of the collapse. The debt is now growing by anywhere from $6 billion to $12 billion every single day. Every time the sun rises, the United States government spends billions of dollars that it does not have, that it will never have, and that it can only pay back by printing counterfeit currency. And the cost of servicing this mountain of debt, the interest payments alone, has now surpassed $1 trillion per year. Think about that. The government is paying more just to cover the interest on its credit card than it pays for the entire defense budget of the country. They are borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money they borrowed last year. This is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. And like every Ponzi scheme in history, it works perfectly fine as long as new money is coming in, as long as the world is willing to buy the debt and hold the dollar. But what happens when the music stops? What happens when the rest of the world, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, looks at that balance sheet and says, "We are done"? What happens when they realize that the United States is mathematically insolvent and can never, ever repay its obligations in real value? They stop trading. They stop sending real cars and real oil and real electronics in exchange for the worthless green paper. And this is the trigger for stage 4. When an empire can no longer function as a merchant, when it can no longer buy what it needs with the integrity of its currency, it transforms into a predator. It shifts from trade to tribute. It shifts from commerce to conquest. This is desperate resource acquisition. For this is exactly what we saw in the final years of the Roman Empire. When the Roman currency collapsed, they didn't stop expanding. They became more aggressive. They raided their neighbors not for glory, but because they needed the gold and the grain to feed a populace that their own economy could no longer support. And this is exactly what we saw on January 3rd in Venezuela. The mainstream media wants you to believe this is about politics. Please. The United States did not send its naval fleet to Caracas because they care about the Venezuelan voter. They sent the fleet because Venezuela is sitting on the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, estimated at 300 billion barrels, worth roughly $17.3 trillion at current prices. Do the math. The United States has $38.5 trillion in debt. Venezuela has $17.3 trillion in oil. This is a liquidation event. The United States is effectively seizing collateral to shore up a balance sheet that is bleeding out. They are grabbing the tangible assets of the global south to plug the hole in the Western financial system. This is the behavior of a cornered animal. A thriving, healthy superpower does not need to raid its neighbors. A thriving superpower creates value, exports goods, and builds wealth. A dying superpower steals. And this shift from creator to thief is the ultimate signal that the currency is dead. The government knows that the exorbitant privilege of the dollar is over. They know that the era of printing wealth is finished. So now they are entering the era of taking wealth. And you have to ask yourself a very terrifying question. If they are willing to violate international law, risk World War III, and invade a sovereign country just to get their hands on resources, do you think your private property is safe? Do you think your 401k is safe? Do you think your bank account is safe? When the state turns predatory, it eats everything. It starts with the foreign enemies, but it always ends with the domestic citizens. They will come for the pension funds. They will come for the retirement accounts. They will come for anything that has real value. And this is why the Venezuela raid is not just a news story. It is a roadmap for your own financial survival. It tells you that the only thing that matters now is bearer assets, assets that you hold, assets that have no counterparty risk, assets that cannot be frozen, sanctioned, or devalued by a desperate government. And this leads us directly to the most chilling parallel of all. If we want to know exactly how this movie ends, if we want to see the script for the next 12 months, we don't need to guess. We just need to look at the most famous collapse in human history. We need to look at the silver denarius. Because the scam they are pulling on you today with paper silver and fiat dollars is the exact same scam that Nero and Aurelian pulled on the citizens of Rome 2,000 years ago. And the result for the people who held the currency was not just poverty, it was starvation. But the result for the people who held the metal, they became the kings of the New World. Let's open the history book to the chapter on Rome. Let's look at the debasement. Let's see why your dollar is about to suffer the same fate as the denarius. You want to know how this ends? You want to know exactly what happens to a civilization when its government decides to turn its currency into a lie? You do not need a crystal ball. You do not need an economics degree from Harvard. You just need to look at the ghost of Rome, because the blueprint for the destruction of the United States dollar was written 2,000 years ago in the ashes of the Roman Empire. We need to talk about the silver denarius. For centuries, the denarius was the envy of the world. It was the world reserve currency of its time. If you went to a merchant in Syria, or a trader in Gaul, or a spice dealer in India, they would accept the denarius without question. Why? Because it was honest money. In the year 64 AD, during the early days of the empire, the denarius was a coin made of 94% pure silver. It had intrinsic value. You didn't need to trust the emperor, you just needed to weigh the coin. The value was in the metal, not the promise. This sound money was the bedrock of the Pax Romana. It allowed trade to flourish. It allowed wealth to build. It kept inflation at zero. But then the corruption started. The emperors became greedy. They wanted to wage endless wars. They wanted to build massive monuments to their own egos. They wanted to buy the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard with lavish bonuses. But they had a problem. They didn't have enough silver. Taxation was already too high. If they raised taxes again, the people would revolt. So, instead of cutting spending, which no government in history has ever done willingly, they decided to cheat. They decided to rig the system. They called in the mint masters and gave them a secret order: mix copper into the silver. They started clipping and shaving the coins. They would melt down 10 silver coins, mix in base metals, and print 12 new coins. It seemed like magic. They had created free money out of thin air. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like quantitative easing? Does that sound like the Federal Reserve buying treasury bonds with money that doesn't exist? The process was slow at first, just like inflation is today. By the year 150 AD, the silver content had dropped to 85%. The people barely noticed. But the addiction to free money is impossible to break. Once you start, you cannot stop. By the year 218 AD, the silver content had collapsed to 43%. And then the bottom fell out. By the year 265 AD, just a few generations later, the denarius contained only 0.05% silver. It was a fraud. It was a copper slug dipped in a thin wash of silver to make it look real. It was a lie masquerading as money. And what was the result? Did the stimulus save Rome? Did the liquidity create prosperity? No, it created hell on earth. Because the market is not stupid. The market eventually realizes the scam. When the merchants realized the coins were trash, they didn't just accept them. They raised their prices. They demanded more of the worthless coins to part with their valuable goods. Prices in the Roman Empire exploded by 1,000%. Wheat, which cost 7 or 8 drachmas in the 2nd century, cost 120,000 drachmas in the 3rd century. The savings of the middle class were wiped out. The veterans who had retired on fixed pensions starved to death because their pensions couldn't buy a loaf of bread. The economy reverted to barter. The soldiers, the very people the emperors were trying to pay, eventually refused to accept the currency. They demanded payment in physical gold, in land, or in salt. When the army stops accepting the money, the empire dies, and Rome fell into chaos, civil war, and darkness. Now, look at your wallet. Look at the United States dollar. Since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, the dollar has lost over 98% of its purchasing power. They have done exactly what Nero did. They have shaved the value away year after year, decade after decade. But the modern version of this scam is even more insidious than mixing copper into coins. The modern scam is the COMEX paper silver market. This is the ultimate coin shaving operation. In the Roman days, they physically diluted the metal. Today, they dilute the claims on the metal. The bullion banks sell paper contracts, certificates that claim to represent silver, but they sell hundreds of times more paper than there is actual silver in the vault. They are running a fractional reserve scheme where for every 1 ounce of physical silver, there might be 100 or 500 ounces of paper silver floating around the system. It is the exact same fraud. They are creating paper silver out of thin air to suppress the price and fund the empire's debts, just like the emperors created copper silver to fund their legions. They tell you that the price of silver is $80, but that is the price of the diluted currency. That is the price of the paper promise. It is a lie. Just like the Roman citizen who thought he had a silver coin but really held a piece of copper. You think you hold wealth when you hold a dollar or a paper contract, but you really hold a liability. You hold a claim on a bankrupt entity. And we are now rapidly approaching the loss of confidence phase, stage 5. This is the moment when the public wakes up. This is the moment when the merchant in Shanghai, the oil driller in Riyadh, and the farmer in Kansas all look at the dollar and say, I don't want this anymore. I don't want your paper. I want the real thing. This is why the raid on Venezuela happened. The United States government knows that the paper game is over. They know they can't print their way out of this anymore. The world is rejecting the debased dollar, just like the Roman legions rejected the debased denarius. So the empire is reverting to the only thing that works when the money fails: force. They are grabbing the oil because oil is real, and very soon they will grab the silver because silver is real. But here is the terrifying part for the average citizen. The emperors and the senators of Rome, they knew the crash was coming. They didn't keep their wealth in denarii. They moved their wealth into vast estates. They bought gold. They bought slaves. They bought productive assets that could survive the collapse. And guess what? The modern senators, the billionaires, the hedge fund managers, the tech oligarchs, they're doing the exact same thing right now. They aren't holding dollars. They're fleeing. They're engaging in the greatest capital flight in human history right under your nose. We need to talk about the millionaire exodus. We need to look at the data that proves the smart money has already pulled the ripcord. Let's look at the Great Escape. Let's see where the rich are going and why you need to follow their lead before the gates close. If you think the collapse of the dollar is some distant theoretical event that might happen in 10 years, you are not paying attention to the people who actually own the world. You need to stop listening to what the elites say on television, and you need to start watching where they are moving their bodies and their money. Because while the politicians are telling you that the economy is strong and resilient, the people with the most to lose are heading for the exits in a panic that we have never seen before in modern history. We need to talk about the Great Escape. We need to talk about a data point that should make every single person watching this video tremble in their boots. According to the latest migration reports released just days ago, a staggering 142,000 millionaires are currently in the process of fleeing the traditional wealth centers of the West. They are packing their bags, they're selling their penthouses in New York, they're closing their accounts in London, and they are leaving. This is the single largest migration of private wealth in human history. Think about what that means. These are the insiders. These are the people who have the private dinners with the senators. These are the people who play golf with the Federal Reserve governors. They know what is coming. They know that the ship has hit the iceberg. And while the band is still playing on the deck for the passengers in steerage, that's you and me, the first-class passengers are quietly lowering the lifeboats. And why are they running now? Why is 2026 the tipping point? Because the mask has finally slipped. On January 5th, just 5 days ago, we heard the quiet admission that changed everything. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, stood up and used a phrase that terrifies every economist who understands it. She admitted that we are dangerously close to fiscal dominance. Now, to the average person, that sounds like boring bureaucratic noise, but to a billionaire, that phrase is a fire alarm. Fiscal dominance is the technical term for game over. It means that the government's debt is so massive that the central bank has lost control. It means they are trapped in a room with no doors. If they raise interest rates to fight inflation, the government goes bankrupt because it can't pay the interest on the $38 trillion debt. But if they lower interest rates to save the government, the inflation explodes and destroys the currency. They are checkmated. There is no way out. The only option left is to print the dollar into oblivion to inflate away the debt. The millionaires heard this. They understood it instantly. They realized that their millions of dollars sitting in American banks are about to be vaporized by inflation or confiscated by capital controls. So they are buying insurance, they are buying golden passports in the Caribbean. They are buying bunkers in New Zealand. They are buying vast tracts of farmland in South America. They are trading their paper dollars for soil, for concrete, and for foreign citizenship. They are diversifying out of the jurisdiction of the United States because they know that when stage 5 hits, when the public panic begins, the government will lock the gates. They will impose capital controls. They will make it illegal to move money out of the country. The rich are getting out now while the door is still ajar. But here's the hard reality for you and me. You probably don't have $2 million to buy citizenship in Malta. You probably don't have a private jet to fly you to a ranch in Patagonia. You are stuck here. You are trapped in the system. Does that mean you are doomed? No. It means you need a different kind of lifeboat. You need a passport that doesn't require a government stamp. You need an asset that acts as portable, unconfiscatable wealth that you can hold in your hand. You need silver. Physical silver is the golden passport for the common man. It is the only asset that allows you to do exactly what the billionaires are doing, but on a smaller scale. When you buy a monster box of silver coins, you are effectively exiting the jurisdiction of the dollar. You are moving your wealth into a sovereign asset that holds its value in any country, under any regime, in any crisis. If the dollar collapses, an ounce of silver is still an ounce of silver. If the bank fails, your silver is still in your safe. If the government imposes capital controls, your silver is invisible to the electronic dragnet. It is freedom. The elites are buying farmland because they know paper is trash. You should be buying silver because you know paper is trash. It is the exact same trade. It is the exact same logic. But you have one massive advantage that the billionaires don't have: liquidity. It is hard to hide a 10,000-acre farm. It is hard to carry a bunker in your pocket, but you can carry a tube of silver eagles. You can barter with it. You can hide it. It is the ultimate survival asset for the chaos that is coming. And do not think for a second that the government isn't watching this. They see the millionaires leaving. They see the capital flight. And this is why they are becoming so aggressive internationally. This brings us back to Venezuela. The government knows it is losing control of the domestic wealth. The tax base is fleeing. So they have to go out and find new wealth to plunder. They have to go seize the oil. And this connects the dots to the scariest part of my prediction. They started with the oil because the military runs on oil. But the modern world runs on something else. The missiles, the chips, the solar panels, the entire green energy grid, it all runs on silver. And the United States is running on empty. If they are willing to invade Venezuela for oil, what do you think they will do when the strategic silver stockpile hits zero? They won't just let the lights go out. They won't just let the war machine stop. They will come for the metal. And this is why silver is about to explode past oil, past gold, and past anything we have ever seen. We need to explain the strategic pivot. We need to explain why silver is the next national security target. Let's move to stage 5. Let's talk about the supply shock that changes everything. And this is where the chessboard becomes terrifyingly clear. This is where you have to stop thinking like a consumer and start thinking like a general in the Pentagon, because the raid on Venezuela was not the end of the operation. It was just the opening move in a much larger, much more desperate campaign to secure the raw materials of survival. They went for the oil first because oil is the blood of the empire. You cannot drive the tanks or fly the jets without it. But if oil is the blood, then silver is the nervous system. And right now, the nervous system of the United States military-industrial complex is on the verge of a total shutdown. Think about the weapons they just used in Caracas. Think about the Tomahawk cruise missiles. Think about the Apache helicopters. Think about the F-35 fighter jets that provided air cover. None of those machines work without silver. Silver is the most conductive metal in the universe. It is the only element that can handle the electronic speed and the thermal stress of modern warfare. Every single missile guidance system requires high-purity silver contacts to ensure that when they push the button, the rocket actually hits the target. Every single satellite that directs those troops relies on silver-coated instruments. The entire green energy transition, the solar panels, the electric vehicles, the smart grid that they are forcing down your throat, is physically impossible to build without massive amounts of silver. And here is the strategic nightmare that keeps the generals awake at night. The United States has zero strategic silver reserves. Decades ago, the government sold off its stockpile. They thought they could always just print dollars and buy what they needed from the market. They thought the global free trade system would last forever. But now, in 2026, the free trade system is dead. The dollar is dying. And the countries that produce the silver, Mexico, Peru, China, Russia, are joining the BRICS alliance. They are forming a bloc that is hostile to the United States. So, put yourself in the shoes of the deep state. You just invaded Venezuela because you were running out of oil. Now, you look at your inventory sheets and you realize you have less than a year's supply of silver left to build your weapons. You realize that if China decides to ban silver exports, which they basically just did, your military becomes obsolete. You cannot build a missile. You cannot build a submarine. You cannot even build a computer for the NSA. What do? You do exactly what you did with the oil. You stop asking nicely and you start taking. But here's the problem. You can't just invade Mexico tomorrow. That is too messy. It is too close to home. So before they send the Marines to seize the mines, they will come for the easiest source of silver available. They will come for the investment-grade silver sitting in the vaults of the COMEX and the ETFS. They will declare silver a strategic critical mineral. They will invoke the Defense Production Act. They will tell the miners, you're no longer allowed to sell to the public. You're no longer allowed to sell to Apple or Samsung. Every ounce you pull out of the ground belongs to the Department of Defense. This is the next Venezuela. It won't be a raid with helicopters. It will be a raid with executive orders. They will nationalize the supply chain because they have no other choice. And this is why the price of silver is going to explode way past the price of oil. Oil is consumed and burned. It is gone. But silver is hoarded. And right now, the silver market is so tight, so incredibly small, that even a whisper of government panic will send the price vertical. We are talking about a market where the total available investment silver is worth less than a single bad day on the stock market. If the Department of Defense tries to buy 100 million ounces to rebuild their stockpile, there is no price high enough to satisfy them. They will pay $200. They will pay $500. Because the alternative is losing the war. The alternative is the collapse of the American empire. So when you see them grabbing the oil, do not think, oh, gas prices might go down. Think, they're securing the physical world. And the most critical, most undervalued, most scarce physical asset in their entire portfolio is the one you can still buy today for $80. They are transitioning from stage 4, grabbing foreign resources, to stage 5. Stage 5 is the internal panic. It is the moment when the public realizes that the government is cannibalizing the economy to feed the war machine. It is the moment when the illusion of fiat wealth shatters and the stampede into hard assets begins. We are standing on the precipice of the greatest psychological shift in human history. The shift from trusting the full faith and credit of the government to trusting the atomic weight of gold and silver. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave the average citizen who is watching their country disintegrate in real time? It leaves you with a very small window of opportunity, a window that is closing faster than anyone realizes. We need to wrap this up with the conclusion. We need to give you the final roadmap for the next few weeks because Stage 5 is not coming next year. It is coming now. Let's tell you exactly what you need to do before the price goes to infinity. Let's finish this briefing. So, this brings us to the final, brutal reality of the situation. We have connected the dots from the raid in Caracas to the debt clock in Washington, from the millionaire flight in London to the empty vaults in New York. The picture is not complicated. It is terrifyingly simple. We are watching the death of a currency in real time. We are watching the transition from Stage 4, where the government steals assets to survive, to Stage 5, where the public loses all confidence in the paper promises. And you have to understand that this transition does not happen gradually. It happens all at once. It is like a dam breaking. One moment the water is held back and everything looks calm. The next moment the wall cracks and the valley is underwater. We are standing at the base of that dam, and the Venezuela raid was the sound of the concrete cracking. The government has shown its hand. They have admitted, through their actions, that the dollar is no longer a store of value. It is a weapon of conquest. And once the general public, the teachers, the truck drivers, the small business owners, realize that their money is backed by nothing but F-35 fighter jets and stolen oil, the psychology of the market will snap. They will not wait for permission. They will run. They will run from the banks. They will run from the bond market. They will run from the stock market. And they will run toward the only things that cannot be printed, hacked, or debased. They will run to food. They will run to land. And they will run to silver. But here's the tragedy. When the herd finally arrives, when the millions of people who are currently asleep finally wake up, it will be too late. The inventory will be gone. The 142,000 millionaires will have already bought it all. The Department of Defense will have already nationalized the mines. The price on the screen might say $200 or $500, but there will be no buy button. There will be sold-out signs on every bullion dealer website in the world. This is why I'm telling you that $80 is a gift. It is not a price, it is an invitation. It is the pre-collapse discount that the market is offering you before the reality sets in. Thinking that silver is expensive at $80 is like thinking a lifeboat is expensive on the Titanic just after it hit the iceberg. The price is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is, do you have a seat? We are at the end of a 2,000-year cycle. History is screaming at us. The Romans who held the debased copper denarius lost everything. They starved in the streets of the eternal city. The Romans who held the physical silver and gold survived. They kept their wealth. They became the architects of the next civilization. You have a choice to make today. You can stay in the burning building, holding your paper dollars, hoping that the politicians will fix the $38 trillion debt that they created. You can hope that the war in Venezuela doesn't spread. You can hope that the millionaires are wrong. Or you can look at the facts. You can look at the helicopters seizing the oil. You can look at the billionaires fleeing the country. You can look at the empty vaults. And you can act. Do not let this moment pass you by. The greatest wealth transfer in human history began on January 3rd at 2 o'clock in the morning. The empire is liquidating itself. Make sure you're on the receiving end of that liquidation, not the paying end. Get out of the paper. Get out of the system. Buy physical silver while it is still legal to do so. Because tomorrow the rules might change. Tomorrow the window might close. The dollar is dead. Long live the metal. This is Asian Guy. See you on the other